This is the Daily Wealth Junkies Show. I'm Brandon Dukeman here with Will Harvey, and thanks for joining us today for another daily episode. But first, before we get started, don't forget, subscribe to the show wherever you're listening to, and join us on Facebook at facebook.com/groups/wealth junkies. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Will to introduce our awesome guest for the day.
Thank you, Brandon. Today on the show, we have Melina Palmer. She is the founder and CEO of The Brainy Business, which is a podcast as well. She's a public speaker for groups ranging from small businesses to multi-billion-dollar corporations, and she focuses on educating them on how the brain makes decisions, and more specifically, buying decisions. So with that, Melina, we'd love to hear a little bit more about your background and what got you to where you are today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on the show.
Sure.
So my undergraduate degree is in marketing, and I spent the bulk of my career in a marketing space. But when I did my undergrad, I remember the last quarter of the last class, just right at the end, there was this one little tidbit about psychology of buying decisions, why people do the things they do and why they buy things. And I was amazed and super excited about it. And I knew that at that moment, I wanted to go back and get a master's in whatever that field was. I spent the better part of 10 years looking for a field that did not yet exist. And then lo and behold, a few years back now, behavioral economics has really started emerging in the space. And so I was able to find a program in behavioral economics, which, as I said, is that psychology of buying decisions, why people buy things, and how we make all of our decisions, which truly comes down to whether you choose to litter on the street or the type of bleach that you buy, what brand you choose. Everything that we do is by these rules of thumb within the brain and how it makes choices. So understanding that, and then helping companies and entrepreneurs to understand how you can use that to better message and price and build out your products to get people to understand what you do and why it's a fit for them. That's essentially what I do.
Wow. That was really quick. I feel like we skipped over so much there.
Yeah.
We can definitely dive deeper into a lot of that.
Of course. Yes.
Yeah. So when you were in college, what do you think fascinated you about that?
I mean, for me, it's just, so the psychological side is something that I find very interesting, and just understanding the brain more. For somebody who, having worked in marketing, you end up with, and advertising, any of that, when you do focus groups or things, you ask people what they want, what they will do, and they almost are never right.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody said they had no use for an iPad or an iPod, when it was first asked about, and
Right.
haha,
Really?
right? Oh yeah. So focus groups said no. And same, I've done analyses of companies on my podcast. I have one about Starbucks, and now I'm totally spacing on the Howard Schultz. That's right. So he has been quoted as saying, if he would have asked people if they wanted to buy a $4 cup of coffee back when he started Starbucks in that avenue, nobody would have said yes. Everybody would have said they didn't need that. But the world we live in shows
Look
if
at them
it's
today.
right, if it's structured properly,
Absolutely.
then you can sell things to people. So that's one of the main things that I help people with, is in pricing, in which I have an episode, The Truth About Pricing. It's number 5. But essentially, the truth about pricing is that pricing is never really about price. All the stuff that happens before you get to the price is much more important than the price itself, which, being in a real estate space, I'm sure you know how a lot of that works as well.
So what are the things that happen leading up to pricing a product?
Yeah, the way that I like to explain how this works is 2 different stories. So we'll start here in the first example. So let's say we are walking down the street having this lovely conversation. We're engrossed in that. And then all of a sudden you can smell a hint of sort of like sugar, a little bit salty. There's a chocolate. We can smell chocolate chip cookies that are around. And we're still talking, but a little bit distracted, looking around to see where they are. What is that? What's the source of this? By the
I'm
time
distracted
we get,
by
I know,
you just saying that.
I know. By the time we get in front of the store, we probably can't stop ourselves from walking in. And then we see, oh, that's so nice. They have a free sample and it's buy 3, get 1 free for today only. How
I am a
exciting.
sucker for those deals. I tell you what, for anything, I am like, oh, it's okay. Buy 2, get 1 free. I'm like, yeah,
Exactly.
I got
right.
them. What a deal I got.
Right.
Yeah.
So before we know it, we each walk out, eating cookies and one that we're going to fight over after the fact, right? Because we got our extra free cookie. If you were to flip the scenario around, so now we'll take a step back. We've all been in that one. So we're walking down the street, we're having the same conversation, and some random guy comes up and shoves a flyer in our faces and says, "Today only, I have a special, 4 for the price of 3. You can get these. Look, I have samples." Kind of going, ugh, guy,
Right.
get out of here. I don't want that. Couldn't you see we were having this conversation? By the time we get in front of the store, we're probably having conversations about the worst customer service experiences we've been through. And maybe when we see it and actually smell the cookies, we're writing Yelp reviews about how much we hate them and what terrible service they have. All the same things happened in those 2 scenarios, but they were in the wrong order. And so the thing that has to happen first, that scent of the cookies, that is the priming. And so helping your subconscious brain, which makes the bulk of your decisions, to know that it wants something, whether it's delicious chocolate chip cookies or a new brand of toothpaste or whatever it is, being able to prime properly for what is to come and to get it excited is the most important first step. And then there's also the scarcity, the way you frame the message. And I break that down in, like I said, on that episode of the podcast, and really throughout a lot of episodes of the podcast. I do a lot of work in pricing.
Wow, that's interesting. And it reminds me of something. My days in the mortgage business, we do open houses with realtors, and sometimes what we do is before the open house started, we bake cookies in the house so that the whole house smells like that. And I guess you just made it make perfect, crystal clear sense to me that it's a total psychological thing where they smell that and say they've been to 3 or 4 different houses that day. The person coming in, they're going to remember that one and they're going to attribute it to something positive and pleasurable because of the smell of the cookies. And that's kind of what you were explaining with if we got a whiff of the cookies before being presented with the deal, the opportunity to, to buy 3, get 1 free, then that would have primed us to want to buy it more. Is that right?
Right. And it doesn't have to just be cookies, but that is a scent that is helpful with nostalgia and emotions. And you remember that in a case of buying a home, it feels more homey when you have that type of a scent, even vanilla or something along those lines. That's also why staging homes is much more impactful on people. You can see yourself there. It activates mirror neurons. But other scents have a big power over us as well. And it doesn't just have to be a physical scent, but I love, there's a study that talks about the scent of lemon. So in restaurants that serve seafood, if you have a very, very, very faint scent of lemon in the air to where people wouldn't even say that they notice or smell it, they actually order more seafood in countries where you are typically going to do a lemon wedge than if you didn't have that scent of lemon in the air. But in a different context, if you have this scent of like a cleaning product, which could also have a lemon vibe to it, people are more likely to pick up after themselves. So it's all these little things that we don't even realize. Yeah. There's also, if you have somebody hold a hot coffee versus an iced coffee for just a moment, they're more likely, if they held the iced coffee, if they were then rating someone's personality traits or whatnot, that they say they're more likely to be difficult and cold. And where if they're holding the hot coffee, they could say that they're more generous and open. So really weird things that shouldn't associate together really do. And our brains are very literal with the way they tie that sort of information back to each other.
What was the one that makes people clean up after themselves better?
It's the It's the scent of like a cleaning type of a product, which,
Okay.
lemon can do some of that too. But
Like Lemon Pledge
they
or
had,
something.
right. So
Okay.
in that case, they gave people a very intentionally crumbly snack while they were doing some sort of a test. And in one group, you had the scent of the cleaning product, not overwhelming, but just faint. And in the other, there was no scent. And when it was there, people were more likely to clean up after themselves versus leaving a mess.
That is bizarre. I'm going to start doing that in the Airbnbs that I have, because some people leave those places a disaster.
Right.
So maybe if I am proactive and spray some Lemon Pledge,
subconsciously get
right.
to your tenants. Yeah.
That's so funny.
I have another a tip you can use for your Airbnbs, which would be, so when you go to the a hotel and you stay and they want you to reuse your towels, so it's either you can hang it up versus leaving it on the floor. So because humans are a herding species, just like cows and sheep and guppies and whatnot, we want to be like everybody else, and especially people like us. And so if there's a message that says, instead of, it would be really great if you did this, if you switch the message to say, people like you are more likely to pick up after themselves or clean up. And in the case, it boosted, and I don't know the exact number, but it brought up the compliance to boosted by 75% when it said,
no kidding,
people like you who've stayed in this room reuse their towels.
So make them feel a little
just like
special.
Everybody.
Oh,
right.
Shoot. If I don't do that, then I'm an outcast.
Right.
Wow. That's interesting.
So how do you teach this to people? How are you?
So I do have the podcast, which is a weekly versus a daily podcast, which I know we talked about a little bit leading into this, and mine are mostly solo episodes. So it's a little bit.
Yeah, I know we're nuts, and everyone tells us that.
Right. So I have some episodes like the truth about pricing, the top 5 wording mistakes businesses make, where I'm showing ways you can apply the concepts. I also have scarcity, loss aversion, herding, framing, mirror neurons. They each have a dedicated episode where it's 30 minutes to an hour for me explaining how it works without using standard deviation and variance and things like that.
All the boring words.
I get to read those articles. You don't have to.
Right.
And the books and things. So pulling out what matters to you and then how you use it. So where that little tidbit from the study about the hot and iced coffee, that might have been a 30-page article that most people would never read, but I can tell you this is why that matters. This is how you would use that. And I do that both in public speaking, through the podcast, and via consulting.
Very cool. So have you ever had a typical job, or did you jump right out into this and start your own thing?
I have had okay. Yes. So after my undergrad, I worked in an advertising agency and PR firm for a short stint of time, and then actually launched a different company which did advertising and marketing and eventually grant writing for credit unions. That's the agency I was at had a specialty in the credit union space.
Oh, nice.
And then I worked I led a marketing team at a credit union in the Seattle area for 6 years while I was sort of looking for the extra, the behavioral economics for that to really be a thing, and doing research and innovation and work there. And one of the great things is, when my department was always different than a lot of marketing departments. We were trying really different things, not just because everybody else did them, which is a herding issue that a lot of people have. So I had times where we were trying to sell auto loans. And so I found a car and we had an artist cut it in half and put one half in one mall and one in another to show that it's easier to cut your payment than it is to cut your car, about auto loan refinancing.
That's fun.
So I was doing a lot of these things even before I had the right terminology and understanding how it all worked. So, and then I went out on my own about 3 years ago, full time, doing the consulting and
so were you just, the reason you went on your own, was it you just wanted to do that, or were you a bad employee? What was the most entrepreneurs are not good employees?
I'm a fantastic employee.
Oh, wow.
That's what all the bad ones say.
Yeah, I was going to say, is that your opinion?
No, I believe my past employers would say I was always a good employee.
Okay.
I was always also that like total nerd, really good student as well.
Got it.
So, but I had a life circumstance that allowed me to have the nudge to move, in that my now husband and I were moving in a space where it would be too difficult to commute. And so that was a good excuse to move forward. And it was in the timing I was, working on my degree and being able to really focus on it. I already had been doing freelance work on the side. And so there were just, it was sort of a perfect storm in a good way of things that all came together to make it to where I could focus on my business being, at the forefront. And when
That's
I
awesome.
started getting my master's degree, I knew that I was early in behavioral economics, and that was one where I wanted to jump on before it gained a lot of traction, to be early. I didn't realize how early I was. And so, when I launched my podcast, it was the first, and for a very long time was the only podcast dedicated to behavioral economics at all. And while you have some like Hidden Brain, they are talking about some of these concepts, but they get into a whole bunch of other things as well. And so the practical application of behavioral economics in business, definitely one of the first in that space, which is why I started my podcast when I did, and really just found in working with different people over time that, while it seems like to me, I always felt that the thing that would be easiest to copy in what I do is the understanding the little tidbit of the academic paper and explaining how it works.
Mm-hmm.
But academics have a really, really hard time doing that. And a lot of them aren't looking to work with companies. They want to do research. That's why they are in academia. And so being a conduit between that and helping a business to understand, to get what their goals are, what they're trying to achieve, find the right academic if we do need to combine and do research together. I do a lot of work with Texas A&M University's Human Behavior Lab on that sort of work. Or if they just need straight up consulting and understanding how the concepts work and how to apply that into a marketing space. So
That's really cool. And it's more useful, for lack of a better, because it's you're appealing to businesses and trying to help them, and that's really neat. You're not just the one that's doing the research for research's sake,
right.
which I think is what you were kind of saying, that a lot of people do that. Is that right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right.
And I have spoken or consulted with everybody from, like I said, small service-based businesses to large candy companies, veterinarians, CPAs, just all across the board. And I have people reach out from all over the world. There are people in over 150 countries that have downloaded the podcast, and I get emails from people that are in India or South Africa and Spain that they, love the podcast, and this is what they're doing. So there's a movement that's coming, and it's definitely growing, and it's an exciting space to be in, as, companies are starting to take notice of the importance of understanding the brain and how people actually make decisions instead of what we think they should do, which is not what people actually do most of the time.
Yeah, I think it's extremely important, and it's overlooked, but kind of what you just said, it's starting to come into reality now that, hey, this is a science, not necessarily, product based. You could have the best product, but if you're not doing what you need to do to reach the buyer, then, who cares about your product?
Right. Yeah. The best products in the wrong position. And there are such small things that can make a big difference. One of my favorite studies that I talk about all the time is, so there was in a grocery store, they had two different end cap displays. And one said Snickers bars, buy them for your freezer. And the other one said Snickers bars, buy 18 for your freezer. which most of us would say 18 is a lot of Snickers bars and probably not what we're buying on a regular basis. And if you were creating the ads for that, before you heard me talking about this and you knew that there was some sort of a trick to what's going on, most people would have chosen to say them versus the number 18. And for a lot of reasons, and having been a marketer, there's it's an arbitrary number. Somebody's going to ask me where I came up with it. I don't want to have to justify it. And them is unlimited. People could get 100 Snickers if they wanted, blah, blah, blah. You can logic your way all the way through. The difference was a 38% increase in sales when it had the number 18 instead of the word.
Wow.
Is that, I was already thinking, I was thinking that was going to be the result, because someone looks at it and says, okay, well, I'm not going to buy 18, but I'll buy one or, or two or
right. So when you walk up, so the concept is called anchoring and adjustment. This is the same thing that makes it so people buy considerably more when something is labeled as 10 for $10 than if it's labeled as $1 each, even though it's the same. So that's a framing and an anchoring kind of working in tandem together. And so in this case, if you're just walking by, if you even notice the sign for them, maybe you'll get one or two. In the 18 example, you're much more likely to notice it and your brain kind of goes, what? That's weird. I don't have a rule for that. And will instead say, 18, I'm way better than everybody else. I don't need 18. I'll just get 6. Haha, yay me. I'm so much better than everyone.
I'm not conforming to their rules.
Right. Yeah. Right. So one of the things I didn't mention that I usually start with is just sort of in how the brain works in a way that's different than what we actually think. So even though we all have brains, we don't really understand what they're doing all the time. So you have, your conscious brain and your subconscious is making decisions and things that you may not realize. So I'll go ahead and ask you, and then for anybody, the audience that's listening, you can think about this, but what percentage of your brain's processing do you think is done on a subconscious level? Say 25, 50, 75?
I would say
most of it.
I would say 50%.
All right. The highest study I've seen puts this at 99.999% of decisions being done on a subconscious level.
No kidding.
Right.
So you're really not even thinking for yourself.
0.0001 that you're
right
thinking?
is right. So when you think you're, doing all the things, that's just the little bits of time that your conscious steps
control
up.
my behaviors. I know I do.
Right. And the sort of general, the lowest I've seen is 95%. I tend to say just 99 for ease of communication on that.
Unreal.
But so essentially your subconscious, it's much faster. It's that automatic processing. And so it's scanning the environment around you all the time to see what it should be doing. And it's looking and saying, that's normal, that's normal, that's normal. I like to think of it like a gatekeeper or the receptionist when you're trying to get a meeting with the executive. So it's scanning normal, 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 and then we'll flag and say, hey, that's weird, conscious, step right up. It's your turn to do something. If you were to think about when you learn to drive a car, it was very tedious and slow, and you're very focused, and where are my hands and what are my feet doing and what is this pedal and where are the mirrors, you're very focused. That was in your conscious space as you were learning the task. It's now gotten into subconscious processing to where your brain does all the same things, but it has rules. It knows how to drive the car. And then maybe you drive a new car and you switch from a step emergency brake to the pull e-brake or a push, and then you kind of do that weird step to nowhere. Or if you're renting a car, or when you're driving between a semi truck and a guardrail and it's pouring rain, and you can sort of feel everything slow down. That's that shift from subconscious to the conscious space. So all these rules that the subconscious is using to make choices, like 10 for $10 versus $1 each, those very, very split second decisions are based on those rules of the subconscious, which we might be able to logic on a conscious level. But in general, it's using that habitual buying of what has worked in the past for the majority of the decisions that you're making all day long.
That's a great example about the driving. I remember when I first got my learner's permit, you're 10 and 2 and you're eyes are focused on the road. You're probably leaning
Mm-hmm.
too far right because you're scared of running into someone. That's always what new drivers do.
Right.
If they're in the U.S.,
Yeah. Right.
it'd be on the left if you're overseas. But
Right.
but yeah, you're real focused and attentive. And then once you get it down, you're driving with one knee and you're eating Chipotle and texting. And, yeah, you shouldn't be
Right. We
doing
know
any
what
of
to
those
do.
Do
things.
it all for
Right.
you. Yep.
But then
Right.
maybe though you're looking for an address and you turn down the volume on the stereo.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
that
good.
music's
Yeah,
distracting.
Right.
that's right.
And it shouldn't be related, but that's just one too many things. So your subconscious, to sort of put this in a different way, is your subconscious can do approximately 11 million bits of information per second. If you were to think about it like a computer, and your conscious brain can do about 40
Wow.
compared to 11 million. It's a
My
pretty
conscious
big
brain
difference.
sucks.
Yeah, it's pretty slow.
That's
And
like
they
running
don't
Windows 98 versus something
not
modern.
even. It's like when watched whatever the movie was when it was, or what they did the initial NASA moon landings and things
Right.
on the like
Mhm.
entire room as a computer.
Yeah, the big supercomputers.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Versus what we're able to do today. So the subconscious is just doing so much that we don't even realize. But understanding these rules of thumb that it uses to make decisions that have been proven across, in general, it's across gender, it's across where you grew up and all age. We make choices this way on a genetic level in a lot of ways. Some of it's learned behavior, like how we drive a car and whether you're on the left or the right side of the street. But a lot of it is just who we are.
What are some things people could do to make their subconscious mind better, or not better, but how can they focus that and channel it into progressing forward into a different venture they're doing, like starting a business or quitting their job or something like that? How can they better themselves?
I actually do a lot on mindset. I have a course that's a 6-week course on mindset that
Oh, very cool.
happens a few times a year, as well as a pricing course for that work there. And I have episodes on mindset as well. So understanding those filters and what you're letting in, if you look at a different way. And so if you say, you're sort of stuck in this rut of a space and I'm just a bad employee, I'm scared, I couldn't move forward, people have always told me X, Y, or Z, and you're stuck in your hurting brain. The things that are making it through aren't necessarily the truth. Our brains get what they expect and what they're looking for because our brains want to prove themselves right. They enjoy being correct. And so they are looking for that all the time. So if you're setting an expectation of not being good enough or not being able to do it, your brain will absolutely find proof of that for you all day long. And so for every one piece of information that makes it through to your brain, if we take that 11 million to 40 in a different way, for every one piece of information you let in, that means 275,000 other things didn't get through to your conscious brain. So if you instead look for something else to focus on in a positive framing, I can share with you, if you wanted to have a link in show notes or whatnot, I have some articles in my column on inc.com about the way that we talk to our own brain, and the way that you frame the message and how that can have a big impact. But if you have a positive affirmation, that's why vision boards are actually very effective, because that subconscious is visual. And so if you pick the couple things you want to focus on and then work to make it so that your brain can't use those rules of thumb quite as often, it can actually help you to change up your day and your life. So what can help you if you want to be more innovative or creative or feel more inspired to change things up, even a small change like brushing your teeth with the other hand, or doing your hair in a different way.
I could do that.
I know. I like to say for the ladies, right, is if you were to put on your makeup with your non-dominant hand, it would be very difficult and awkward. Also taking a different route to work, or if you typically put your cereal in and then the milk, if you put milk first and then cereal, just
unacceptable. It's cereal, then milk. But
I think it's
disagree.
been proven that most serial killers put the milk in first.
Well, just so you know, reek. I'm coming for you guys. I'm a milk first.
Man, I'm
milk
just kidding.
first. Okay.
But I milk first mostly because I can't stand soggy cereal. So
Okay.
I do
Except,
little bits of cereal at a time and end up having like 8 tiny bowls instead of one giant bowl
That's
of
funny.
cereal.
Okay. So you just pour it as you go.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Very
A
cool.
scale in that way. So for
that's
me, it would actually be, if I was to go cereal first, that would be what would change up my brain
Ah,
in that capacity. So it's doing something different than what you normally do. And so if you typically drink coffee, go for tea or orange juice, or like I said, take a different route to work. And it can just help your brain to not be so stuck in the ways it's always doing things. And then looking at, what you want to be focusing on instead. And if you do have companies that you really admire, you can put images of them around you. Like I said, in that vision board space, there was one study that was done where people were watching a video, and for just a flash of a second, to where, again, you didn't consciously register, one group was shown an Apple logo and the other was shown an IBM logo. And that's where people would say, we didn't see it, nobody saw it. But then they were working on a creative task after the fact, and those who saw the Apple logo came up with much more creative examples and
wow.
opportunities than those who got the flash of the IBM logo. So what you put in your space is very important. And so you don't want to say things like, oh, I'm super busy, or things are so difficult, or, TGIF, or another case of the Mondays, right? You don't want all that around you.
Yeah.
If you focus on it being positive and good, it will be that. You can create your own reality, truly.
That's great advice, just about changing stuff up, changing the hand you brush your teeth with, or and all that. It just kind of shakes everything up and makes you think differently, and I'm sure that stimulates growth.
Absolutely. So it doesn't have to be huge stuff to make a difference. The little word in the ad that made such a change, or just being, so I end all of my emails and every episode of the podcast with "be thoughtful." That's it's sort of my, I guess, tagline or whatnot on things. And so just being more aware, being thoughtful in the world and understanding what's around you and being curious and asking good questions can make such a huge difference in the way that you experience everything that you're doing.
absolutely.
And why was this done this way? And if your brain says, I'm not good enough, or I'm not ready, instead of just sort of accepting that, to say, well, says who? When will how would I know if I'm ready? Did so and so know if they were
Right.
ready? When you can kind of ask questions, you can jog yourself out of those blocks.
That's really good. I love that.
So, Melina, where do you see yourself and your business and podcasts and all that going in the future? I mean, what are your goals for that?
My goals are ones that are, as high as I can get, I suppose, in that I've really made it my mission to bring behavioral economics out of academia and into application, and to let as many people as possible know what it is and why it exists and why it's important to them. The sort of comparison point that I have made as a statement for my business is that I really want to do for behavioral economics what Susie Orman did for personal finance.
That's really cool.
Awesome.
I love that.
Awesome.
Yeah, that's great.
And how long's your podcast been running for?
We're coming up on, so I guess by the time this comes out, it'll be just over 18 months.
Nice.
That's, and do you plan on doing that for as long as forever, or is there kind of a, until this happens, then I'll continue doing it?
At least for now, that's the plan, to keep it going. It's so well received, and there's so much content to be bringing in. And I think, it sees different iterations over time. I've started doing a few interviews with people now, and like I said, analyses of businesses like Starbucks and Costco. And so I think there could be shifts as I'm working with a client and we're able to talk about what we did on that project, or do more what other people are doing in the field. I think there's so much that can be done with it. It might not look exactly the same, but at least for the semi-foreseeable future, there's no plan for it to go away.
Right. And let me ask,
That's
so
great.
in our multifamily world, there's a pretty famous guy who talks about a thought leadership platform, which, whatever that might be for him, it was a podcast. And so I'll call it the thought leadership platform. So how has the podcast kind of shaped your business, and can you attribute your success in your industry to the podcast?
Yes,
Yeah.
no question. And I will say that's not the case for everybody. And it's not that. So podcasts are a lot of work. They take a ton of time. It is
Yes,
not
they
the
are.
like get your business going quick scheme that it might seem to be. And mine is one where I have a ton of research and citations and stuff in getting those done. Because I entered in as the first, I had the bluest of blue oceans, having anybody searching for behavioral
Oh,
economics or
nice.
psychology of buying. I was it. It was the
Mhm.
only one coming up. So that was really helpful. And my voice is unique in the way that I'm talking about it. And because I have a history of public speaking and I understand the marketing, there's a lot of groundwork that has made it as successful as it is. But
You're not a nerd. That's what you're trying to say.
I'm a total nerd. It's okay. I get it.
We don't
But
come across as one.
thank you. A different kind of nerd, I guess.
Yeah.
But the relationship with Texas A&M came through the podcast, and people that I've interviewed have come through, sharing the podcast and speaking engagements, being able to say, oh, and I have this podcast, and it was listed as a top business and marketing podcast you should listen to by Inc.com. And it was this and that and the other, having that for people that don't understand what it is, it sounds really boring and dumb and not useful as a concept.
Right.
And so being able to say, this is what it is, and this is how I talk about it, has been extremely helpful. And then for people that do then want to come in and work with me, this is me. You hear me talking about it exactly the way I'm going to talk about it when we're in, in a workshop or whatever it happens to be. So
Right.
it's a really great way for people to understand how they might work with me and how it all even works, and get quick wins themselves by listening. A lot of people
Absolutely.
share those.
Yeah,
with me,
it's free information that you're handing out, and that's the best part.
Yeah.
So, well, Melina, we're going to jump into our Moments of Truth segment here. It's the same 7 questions we ask all of our guests, and we are just going to get rolling with the first question. Who is your success role model?
I really love Ellen. So I would say Ellen DeGeneres. I like that she has stayed true to being kind to people throughout and being very open and different.
Love it.
Yeah, that's awesome. I've never had anybody bring her up. So
Yeah.
I like hearing everybody's, different people. So
yeah, that's right. What's your biggest success?
That's a good, I guess I will just go ahead and say it's, maybe my Inc.com column. Getting a column with Inc.com was pretty cool.
Yeah.
We're hitting 100,000 downloads. So
yeah, both
awesome.
of those are huge. That's great.
Congratulations on that.
Thank you.
What's a typical day for you look like?
A lot of writing things and researching things and spending a little bit too much time on social media.
I'm sure it drives your business. So it's
productive.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what I say. It's productive procrastination.
Yeah. Unfortunately, mine is just scrolling through Facebook videos and laughing at people. And stuff.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Looking at people fight over politics.
Yes. Yeah.
I don't. I try to avoid politics as much as I can.
Oh, yeah.
But I get sucked into really important things like people frosting cookies or icing cakes on Instagram. That's
hilarious.
Yeah, and then your subconscious mind kind of kicks in and says, I think we need to go get some ice cream or some dessert. Or like the next morning you wake up and you're like, man, I could go for some dessert.
Right. Absolutely.
So, yeah. What's your favorite quote?
I would say, so my first iteration of my business was called Defying Gravity, and it was important to me based on the show Wicked, and the main song from that is called Defying Gravity, and it's about like changing what you're about and your mindset and all of this. And so that like can't be the same, and I would rather buy Defying Gravity otherwise. So I think something in that realm is where quote would be.
That's great.
What are some of your hobbies?
I actually do like to sing. I do national anthems for some professional sports teams sometimes.
Cool.
And I used to compete singing opera and sing with a country band here in Seattle. And I also travel a lot with my husband.
That's awesome.
Love it.
Is it nerve-wracking to sing the national anthem in front of a bunch of people?
It's not in that. I mean, you get a little bit of the anxious, I guess, of, wanting to be on the other side more than anything. I've done enough of them now, but when I did the Seattle Mariners was the first really big one that I did. And I
Wow.
really didn't want to see, they have the giant scoreboard that's out in front. And so to see my face, 100 feet high or whatever it is.
Oh, that's
so I
funny.
just like stare at home plate and don't look up the whole time.
Yeah, that's kind of
Have
weird.
you ever forgotten the lyrics?
Thankfully, no.
No? Okay.
No, but that's, knock on everything in the world to
absolutely.
say
I wouldn't wish that upon you.
That's the biggest fear, but that's a mindset thing, right? So,
absolutely.
Right.
you're not going to, it's done it enough that it's sort of conditioned in my brain now how it goes.
That's cool. What's the best business book that you've read?
I would say just my favorite book is called A More Beautiful Question by Warren Berger. And it is about innovative thinking and how you can look at things a little bit differently. And some of these really big companies and things that have shaken up the world and been more innovative, like Airbnb and Netflix, how they're actually combinations of various different things and really well thought out questions that become sort of a mission for people, and how to find your own question. So that is all the time absolutely my favorite book.
That's cool.
Yeah. And last question here. If there's one key piece of advice you could leave our listeners with about achieving success, what do you think it would be?
Well, I feel like I just have to go with the, be thoughtful, right? So
Yeah,
just pay a little bit more attention, and
brush your teeth with the left hand.
Yep.
Right.
Ask questions.
do something. Yeah, seriously. But that's all great advice.
Yeah, it really is.
So I know you've mentioned it a few times, but Melina, how can our listeners get in contact with you and name of your podcast and all that again?
Absolutely. So the podcast is called The Brainy Business, and you should be able to find it in all of the apps and things. My website is thebrainybusiness.com, and you can find me on any of the socials as The Brainy Biz, B-I-Z.
Nice.
Awesome. Well, Melina, we appreciate you being on the show today. I know I learned a lot. So, I'm going to start, when I brush my teeth tonight, I'm going to try my left hand, and it's going to go completely terrible. But
yeah, see how it goes.
I'll try
my whole left side is complete.
Yeah, I brush with my left, so I'll switch over to the right side, and we'll see how it goes.
Changing mindsets here.
Yeah.
But again,
Best
Melina,
of luck.
We appreciate you being on the show today, and for all our listeners, don't forget, subscribe to the show so that way you're not missing any of these awesome daily episodes. Again, Melina, we appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And everybody, go brush your teeth
left
with
hand.
your other hand. Yeah. Thanks, Melina.
Thank you.